Hi, good evening. This is Vishak. Welcome to yet another webinar series from Apposite. Been looking forward to this one. I have Sid with me, who is the organizer for this webinar. Hi, Sid. I have Will. Will is from Novartis, and Will is joining me for this webinar. And we are really looking forward to kind of kicking this off. Good evening and welcome to all of you. Let me share my screen. Let me know if you're able to see my screen, Will.
It's just loading there now, buddy. Yeah, we've got you there now.
Okay, great. So a little bit of introduction. I think we have been talking a lot about transformation of learning design over the last few weeks, and ever since artificial intelligence kind of kicked in and we have been seeing a lot of tools, we have been talking a lot about how things have been changing in the learning and development field. We have also covered some sessions where we spoke about how to use AI tools and various strategies to kind of improve the learning experience, effectiveness, analytics, and various other topics. But I guess one of the buzzwords that has been floating around right now is microlearning, and it's kind of it's always been there, but I guess right now over the last maybe month or so, I've been noticing a lot of buzz around this on LinkedIn and various other forums. So I think it's good that we kind of explored this a little bit into depth. Will and I have been kind of talking about this a little, and we feel that exploring a little bit into the science of microlearning, why it's really relevant, would kind of build in that context before we kind of jump into actual strategies and what exactly can we do with microlearning. So Will, really great to have you over here, and I think we need to start with a little bit of an introduction here. So Will and I have been working together for what? It's been like close to 2 years now, 3 years.
Yeah. It's been a while, all right, buddy. Yeah.
Totally, and it's been a ride, a really exciting ride so far. A lot of nice projects and conversations and things that have been keeping us engaged. So a little bit of background. Will is into project management, leading the Center of Excellence over there at Novartis, and he's been like working with me. We've been working on some learning projects, trying to understand how to kind of better the experience and such. But what really kind of captures me is the fact that Will comes from the defense background. He was an Army vet. And so, as you can see from the picture, I really got a really nice picture. Thank you for this, Will. That really excites me because ever since I got into instructional design, I've always heard about how much the defense complexes around the world have contributed to instructional design and the learning and design development of it. Why? Because the defense complexes pay a lot of attention to getting things done right, very accurately and in time. A lot of critical risks involved. So within this, they have really figured out how learning and development, especially training, is like a huge, very significant element. So, Will, I'm not going to tell more. I'd like to hear from you about this. And that's one of the reasons why I think this is really exciting to have you on the session.
Yeah, look, thanks for everyone who's joining. It's great to have you all online. And I do see a couple of colleagues there as well from college and from work. So again, delighted to be joining. And yeah, look, you and I regularly catch up and shoot the breeze and talk about all things learning. But I think, look, I'm a number of years out. I left in 2017 from the organization, but with a 30-year background, I keep seeing it coming up and again with references to the type of training that we're doing today, the demands for training, the standards that we need. And certainly one of the things that I saw over time was that doing training to the point where you get it right, you just get it right. The standards are very high, the expectations are very high, and you bring people along with you. And it's been a great journey of learning as well, in the sense that when you're actually in that environment learning together, the community, the collective is actually where the power lays. So if you look at your workforce and you have an organization that has a lot of people working together, if you have that collaborative space where you've got a lot of experts who are working together on an engagement, on a project, on a program, whatever it is, especially with shared learning and with shared knowledge transfer, these people then are in a really strong position to be very high performers. And I would have been very proud to have worked with a lot of high performers over the years. And it was a case of, yes, doing some training that was quite, complex and detailed, but also micro-learning moments, which is, I know we're going to get into the micro-learning piece, but absolutely, for many years, they've been doing it, bite-sized learning, all of that type of stuff. And it is really impactful when done right, which we'll come back to what we'll have a chat about later on, Viṣak. But delighted to be able to join you on the call. And I'm getting flashbacks of that pic. That's when I was actually heading home from a mission. And anyone who has a military background would know what that red strapping is. So I don't need to tell you.
Thank you so much, Will. And yes, I guess there's so much that we can learn from our current, our previous experiences in various mission critical projects and such, that we can actually bring in to our corporate learning domain, and it's a lot of relevance over there. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of tapping into that, Will.
Super.
So yes, the reason why we are kind of getting into this is to understand, what microlearning is, what are the benefits from microlearning, why do we need to use microlearning, first of all, in the first place. I mean, everything that we do, at least specifically in the learning industry, we have this saying, right? It has to be evidence informed. If it's not working for a large group of people, if it doesn't have that measured outcome that we can guarantee, then how do we kind of make sure that it works every single time that we try? So from that perspective, I guess we are going to look at some of the things like, with microlearning comes in some things like spaced repetition, and, how we need to kind of bring in practice within that at regular intervals. So these things are concepts around microlearning that we need to kind of discuss. So I think I'd like to start over here, Will, with a thought experiment. Yes. So this is something that I think a lot of people within the learning industry would kind of experience, where we have corporates, we have a certain compliance program or some regulatory mandate that has come in, and think about it like, this company requires a certain cost to be spent on a particular training program to ensure that all the employees are trained, and they go for it. They do an 8-hour training session. They make sure that all employees are formed into cohorts and make sure that they attend the training. They have an assessment. They fly in with all, make sure that all the assessments are completed. We can track all of that. At the end of the day, it's a compliance check mark that all the employees have been trained on this. But we do hear of situations where, right after that, probably 6 months or a year down the line, we come across instances where things have failed. And, when we trace back root cause analysis, we see that something has failed within that initial training program. Something has missed out. Say, in this case, a small little protocol that, was covered in probably hour 6 of that 8-hour program. That's what missed out, and we have this instance, and then we have that incident. What do you think? I mean, this is something that we see regularly.
We do, Viṣak. And I think one of the things is that when you look at in this example, it's a very long program, and it's probably one of these mandatory pieces. But you're straight away getting into cognitive overload here, and what you have in the example here would be that, yes, it's all essential. You've got to get this information in. It's really important stuff. There's a lot of stuff you could do as pre-reads. That is stuff that can be done beforehand. But I think one of the big takeaways here is that if you had down the line something has happened, that part of the learning or the training that took place months ago, that 8-hour session, which is quite exhausting, probably a couple of 4-hour sessions online, it's quite exhausting.
Yeah.
Is that you maybe would have covered that topic that related to something that happened down the line in an afternoon where people have already been online for 3 hours. They're quite tired. And it's not without motivation, because people are joining this for a reason. But it's that, you have so much being presented to people that it just becomes a wall. And if you were to honestly ask people to say, listen, do you remember what we discussed in details a couple of hours ago? That would be a challenge for some people, because it's been such an amount coming at you. And then you generally tend to look at all of your notes, your scribbles, your poorly handwritten notes you've tried to write down for later review. And occasionally what we do as well is we pop in a little bit of homework to do before the next session, which will most likely be tomorrow morning for another 4 hours. And that's very challenging. So I think from a learning delivery perspective, bite-sized training here is applicable. Of course, there's stuff that's mandatory, SOPs, health and safety, ERC stuff that companies have to do. I get that. But there are better ways of delivering training in such a way that it matches with people's learning ability. And if you look at an 8-hour session of safety training, that's a lot for anybody. And to keep people motivated to stay with it, it would want to be a very, very engaging, plenty of breakouts, plenty of activities type of engagement. But I definitely do think that you could look at some elements that what could be put online, what could be made a microlearning. What do you need to have people in the room for? Do you need to have them there for the full 8 hours? Is there stuff that they can do on maybe your LXP or on your LMS that they can go in and actually undertake it, and you get your little certification that yes, Will has completed it and Viṣak has completed it.
Yeah.
But it's a big piece of training there. And what can happen is you get skill fade quite quickly, because as you're going to discuss later on around the curve, is that people do forget, and concerningly quite quickly.
And so, I mean, there is one way you were saying that, some of these trainings would be mandatory, right? So we can't really skip that initial 8 hours. Even if we do come with a microlearning strategy, there are some cases where they have to sit through that initial state. But what we are looking at is, in many cases, that's not the ideal way of training, right? Like that initial 8 hours is not. So that's what you're saying. So
yeah, and we do get as well, Viṣak, is and a lot of people are guilty. And I'll bring the military context in here, in the sense that we try to get people through onboarding training or induction training very quickly. And I would argue sometimes too quickly, which means that we have to front load all of this learning up front. We have to do it in a packed timeline, because we've just hired them. They go in, do their their new employee onboarding, and all of a sudden we want them out of that in 3 days, ready to come in and work with the business.
Right.
And that is a very compressed timeline. And what it can lead to is a lot of overload. Apart from the fact that you just hired somebody and they're ready to come in and start a new job, even with someone who's in an existing role, give time to learning, give time to training, because what you do is then it just becomes a bypass. It's just a sidebar. It's just a thing that you'll do to just check the boxes. And of course, we don't want it to be a box checking exercise. Safety training particularly is very important. ERC, compliance, they're all very important. And everyone is bidding for a part of the time of the curricula or the onboarding timetable. So I definitely think that giving it sufficient time means that you can have a blended approach of, face-to-face if you're fortunate, but breaking up that learning into much more bite-sized, palatable pieces so people can actually learn, absorb it, and even then breaking up. You don't have to do lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, one after the other. You can break it up over a couple of days and go from beginning stuff to intermediate stuff to maybe more advanced stuff. So there's a number of ways you can do it. My biggest concern, and we've certainly talked about this before, is that cognitive overload. It's just you're throwing stuff at learners. And the question really then, when you look at impact and analytics later on, is did it really land with them? And what you probably find is that people are catching up for many weeks and months afterwards to try and say, I remember we discussed it on that training session, but I just can't remember it. So I have to go back and hopefully look over the notes that I hopefully got.
Yeah. So that's what I guess what I'm hearing is that there are certain cases where we cannot avoid that initial, onboarding or that initial process training where they have to go through that entire session.
Absolutely.
The problem is that sometimes they are not able to, or in most cases, they are not able to retain that information over a period of time. So then, what do we do over there? I guess keeping that in mind, right? What can we do differently? And yes, we spoke about this. Reality is that months later, employees would not even remember a lot of the training from the initial days. So the alternative that we are proposing over here is that a micro-learning approach where we can have a spaced, repetitive, strategy. We can give in bite-sized modules, but we keep doing it. That's I guess, the key over here, because that's how memory builds up, right? And I'm kind of leading into something else over here, but yeah, it's important, and this probably comes in from the military training way, right, where things are.
I'll give you a good example. It's a funny one, but it's a very simple example. And one of the things that we would teach as part of training, like anyone who lives near a military barracks would probably hear soldiers who are brand new walking around going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And what they're actually doing is marching, but they don't know how to march yet. So you just tell them to count, and they just walk around, and everyone looks at these people like going, oh my God, who are they? But when you get into the instruction of teaching people to march together, as a very simple example, one of the things we would do is teaching them for a 45-minute lesson is to turn right in a static position. And what you would do is you would break that turning right action, which is literally turning 90 degrees left or right, and then bringing your foot to the side of you, and you're ready to move in a different direction. And they would break it down. And what would happen is, and this is, again, you go back to things like Gagne's 9 events of instruction, which talks about gaining attention. So with that, the instructor would give a full demonstration of a right turn, or whatever it might be, an about turn, or whatever military drill you want to practice them on. And in this example, they would then say, okay, we're not going to do the full turn yet. We're going to break it down into the very first part of the movement. And then we practice it. And then you go off as a little group and you check each other. And I come and I validate and check you're doing it okay. And then we come back and then we do the second movement. And by the time the lesson's over, you can now, albeit you have to practice, you can actually perform the first movement. So what we did there was we had 3 micro training sessions in one. And what it does then is we repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And within a very short space of time, you don't hear them doing 1, 2, 3, 4 anymore. And because they're marching everywhere every day, they're now reinforcing the skill. So they're using what they've been taught. It makes sense. The orders that they get make sense. And when you tell them to turn right in a uniform and soldier-like manner, which is actually part of the language we would have used, there's a thing called phraseology. And in that, when you have them all turning exactly the same direction at the same time, and it's one single sound, they've mastered it. And they never, ever, ever forget it. Because you have veterans who are in their 80s, in their 70s, like me in 57, we still remember that order, and we still remember the actions to take. So it gets into long-term memory. That's just a very simple example of taking something and breaking it down into bite-sized training.
Yeah, it becomes muscle memory, right? You keep doing it, and then you follow that particular approach that the instructor is showing, and then it
exactly. And that's where the value of things like spaced learning. We've spoken about spaced learning before. That type of thing where you can repeat and remind people. It's those little nudges every so often to re-engage with the learning, and then it suddenly becomes part of their norm. Then they have it. It's been embedded into long-term memory, and they just get it then.
Yeah, I think I keep going back to my school days, right? You remember the multiplication tables? We had to kind of memorize it and repeat it and memorize it and repeat it till it becomes kind of part of who you are. So the problem is, I guess, with adults, they have certain biases. So it's not easy to kind of get them to sit and just repeat and learn. So that's where I guess we'll need engagement strategies to kind of make it exciting, pull them in.
And Viṣak, let's not forget that we have so many variations of, like, people will talk about learning styles, and some people say learning styles is a fad, and I would agree in some way, but I would also disagree in another. And I think when you design learning well, and you understand with accessibility, with people who may not necessarily be visual or auditory, they might just have visual issues or challenges with their eyesight. And when you design learning well, and you can build it in such a way that it just works for people, that's why you take your time to design it well. And exactly as you said there with the multiplication, one approach would work for some people. Other people, there's a great program used to be called here, the Maths Factor, and a lady called Carol Vorderman would teach you how to do the 9 times tables or the 3 times tables using your keypad on your mobile phone. It works, it's different, but all of a sudden kiddies were doing it and then using their fingers, you know, like you go like 9 times tables using your 10 hands, you know, drop this, and you go, well, you know, what is that now? Suddenly it's 28, you know, sorry, 27. And you're working, and my children are baffled by this, but the end result is they know how to do maths or mathematics.
Yeah.
So there's many ways to skin that cat, Viṣak.
I swear. So yeah, I mean, I guess we get it, right? The context behind why we need some kind of a learning strategy for the lack of, you know, using microlearning as the terminology, something that's chunked, bite-sized, something that we can repeat over a period of time, and something that keeps us engaged to the learning. So I think we are getting there to understanding, you know, the importance of microlearning. I also wanted to kind of dig a little bit into the seriousness of, you know, what happens when learning fails, because we need to understand some of the implications of what happens when learning is not done in a proper way, how big of an impact. So I believe I spoke about this. I removed the company name so that we don't hurt anybody's, you know, sentiments or anything, but this is quite famous, right? We have heard of this, where
Correct.
it's one of the largest US oil spills in that region, and suffice to say the impact was like mind-blowing in terms of costs, and this is in 2010, so $65 billion at that time is like a huge deal. But besides the impact, I guess when they did a root cause analysis, they found out that training was lacking over there. Most of the employees, you know, within that oil facility, they were asked to kind of get things done fast, and we see this, right, with a lot of organizations where speed is of utmost importance, and so a lot of things are just kind of sidestepped or, you know, kept in under the carpet. So here, this is one, I guess, one thing that we can see where training, maybe these people would have gone through that initial onboarding, right? We can probably hope that they've gone through that initial onboarding and the compliance is checked. But did they keep training? Did they keep getting that, you know, reinforcement of learning over a period of time? And that's what led to this impact. This is one. There's another one that I wanted to tell about, and this one also, it's a German car manufacturer who we know that, you know, in 2015 they released a lot of cars where the mechanism to test for emissions was cheated. They used certain devices that, you know, skipped the emission thing, and this led to a lot of, you know, vehicles that were polluting up to 40 times the legal limits. Stock prices dropped, reputation for the company dropped like crazy. There were, you know, callbacks of almost 11 million vehicles. So that's like a huge impact again. And
Absolutely.
why did this happen? I mean, obviously for ethical and, you know, considerations were not followed by engineers during that time. And then that kind of led to a cascade effect and things happened. So these kind of examples are not really far away from where we are, right? In terms of the organizations that are currently there, these things can happen. And we see that this is directly linked to training, where if we had given that regular, you know, reinforcement of this is right, this is wrong, this needs to be kept in mind. And if it was there, probably we could have avoided these instances. So yeah.
Very much so. And I would say, Viṣak, as well, within Novartis, obviously within the pharmaceutical industry, there's a lot of regulation there. And Novartis are very proactive about not just protecting the organization, but having its associates understand their role in protecting the company, protecting our patients, because that's ultimately who we serve, the patients, millions of patients worldwide.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, I think ethics was listed in one of them there, certainly around the vehicle example.
Right.
And we do take the time to undertake the training specific to, our, so let's say code of ethics or ethical behaviors. And that's a real, it's a really unique, I won't say unique to Novartis, but it's a really good thing to see within an organization of its size that they take it so serious. And some of these organizations that you've mentioned could have learned a lesson or two from that. And it's not a heavy lift. At the end of the day, we have a speak up culture in Novartis. If I see something that's wrong, I'm obliged to speak up. We know in sport, I think one of our colleagues is from sport there, in child protection, you're obliged to speak up.
Right.
And what it would appear is that in these cultures, either they weren't aware of it or the culture was quite toxic in the sense that they didn't promote it's okay to speak up about this stuff. And when you look at, for example, the first one is, it mentioned there around almost like reactionary training that wasn't there. There was a gap in that. And one of the things we used to have in the military was called immediate actions, IAs. And IAs were basically around the fact that if something happened, whether it be with a weapon or an event or something, there was an SOP. There was a process in place to do it. And everybody was trained. And in this case, you look at ships within, for example, the naval service or navies, the cook, the mechanic, the captain, everyone in that ship has a role to play when something goes wrong.
Right.
And when you look at the training failures there, insufficient emergency response training, everybody should have had a role in that and know what to do to try and mitigate the risk. And again, the risk was beyond just damage, obviously, to the platform, but you look at the environmental damage that was done, which is significant. So I think organizations are getting better at this. I think probably because they have had lessons learned and they've looked at the impact of maybe a sister or a not too distant competitor has had challenges before, and they can see the impact of it. So I definitely do think, though, that training and learning has a place in protecting the organization and helping it then to get a point where it can actually operate safely. And if something, heavens forbid, does happen, that they have a process in place to address it. And that's where training can come in. And, if you fail to plan or you plan to fail if you fail to plan type of thing. So you've got a plan for things happening. And it's really critical. And it could be a very small piece of training in this, a fire marshal training. Could be something so simple as picking up the right fire extinguisher for the right type of fire. It's so small, but again, so important as well. Okay.
Yeah. And I think it is important that, employees are trained on this, but the fact that, and I'm getting to this in the next slide, it's probably very relevant to see that they forget, right? I mean, if we have that initial onboarding or that training on that SOP, and if we don't kind of reinforce it or, make it in a way that they kind of have constant access to it or comes up in their regular workflow, right, when they need it. So those kind of strategies, those kind of mechanisms are available today because of the technology, but it's important that we kind of pay attention to that. And I think the fact about that memory, and this is important and very interesting, this gentleman called Herman Ebbinghaus, he is, I was going through his background, and he is a military veteran, just like you, Will. So it was during that time when he was getting into exploring about human memory that he did. This is like more than 100 years back. So I'm like really amazed. He did a lot of experiments into understanding human memory, and the results that he came up with are like amazing, like mind-blowing. The forgetting curve, it says that whatever information that we take up initially, within 24 hours, 70% of that information is just lost. And then more than 24 hours later, it's a week later, almost 90% of that content is lost from our heads. And this is an evolutionary thing. We can't remember so many things because then our minds would get cognitively overloaded. We would not be able to function as normally. So it is important that we clear up our, probably the RAM in our heads to kind of make space for more information to come in. But this problem exists, right? And our training, our conventional ways of training, where we put them through 8 hours of training or 6 hours or whatever, and then forget about it for the rest of the time, that is what's leading to some of those problems where we saw earlier, right? I mean, they did go through that initial training, but they did not remember it when the time called for it. So this is really interesting, and microlearning kind of actually addresses this, because when we kind of give them the right information in that bite-sized way, we actually see that we are not letting them forget. We are kind of making them get into that state to constantly remember, create those new synapses, create those, memory circuits that make sure that we remember what you said about that within the army, right? How to learn about going left and right and taking those different movements. So I guess this is somewhere something that we can relate to in our current corporate learning strategies and such. We should make use of the way that we kind of put in those information at the right time, make sure that they remember it regularly, and then constantly test them. And we can use lots of different engagement strategies like scenarios and storytelling and game-based learning to make sure that they get in. But this thing is very important. I feel that
I think, Viṣakha, I know we were chatting yesterday. I had a very funny example. I'll share it with the guys now, but I think it does go back as well to the design of the learning. If you design it well, first of all, the impact for learner, and I mean also duration as well as the quality of the content, and taking into account the ability of a human being to take on learning and what they're actually capable of doing. Studies like this, and there are many, but again, find the same thing. And we experience basis to reflect back and say, well, what did you learn a few hours ago? You have to think a bit. There's often times I'm there the following morning saying, what movie did I watch last night? And then somebody remembers probably Top Gun 2, the 5th or 6th time. But the big point I'd make here is a micro-learning boost that you mentioned here. It's a top-up. And you're constantly just saying to the learner, hey, remember that piece you did a little while ago? Here it is again. And it doesn't have to necessarily be as comprehensive as it was in the instruction. But what you're doing is you're firing off those little sparks in the brain again to reflect back, because it's in there. It is in there. It just hasn't transferred over to long-term memory yet. Yeah. And I'll give you one example. The funny one I was telling you about and share with the audience was many years ago, we were on a course in the military, and this is probably one of the most memorable face-to-face lessons I ever did. And we actually did a mock funeral. And while it sounds very dark and dull, we actually had to practice how to do a funeral properly in the organization. And we actually did a real mock funeral. With it, we had one of the instructors pretended to be a priest and do the service. And I can still remember every single detail of it because we went through it. It was well designed. It had a real world applicability. So over the many years, we did many of these. But in any exercise, whether it be in engineering, whether it be in sport, whether it be in governance, if you're going to apply it again, the training that's been done and it's applicable is immediately going to be like a magnet. And again, those top-ups, as you mentioned with the boost, really do help. But the great thing was that it was well-designed learning, and it was designed in such a way that it appealed and it stuck. And we got to then repeat it over and over. And that way, you're an expert, and the forgetting curve effect wasn't as bad as time went on, because if you can imagine, ours was moving knowledge from, say, tacit knowledge into much more ingrained long-term memory. And that made it so much easier. When you revisited or when you did another boost, you maybe didn't have to go all the way back to the beginning. Maybe you can just reflect back to a certain point, and then it's topped up again. And again, being humans, you're inquisitive, you want to know more. You maybe read up on it again, and you maybe look back in your notes and say, happy days, I'm ready to move forward.
Yeah. It's surprising. Ebbinghaus actually did one of those experiments where he remembered something, and then he made sure that he forgot the entire sequence of what he learned, and then came back to it again, and he measured the time, and he found that it took way lesser than the initial time.
Like it is in there, Viṣak. Like, you know, you've often seen things from when you were a child or younger, and it's suddenly, you know, even a song you may have heard many years ago, and before you know it, then you're back singing it again quite quickly. So it is in there. It's just a case of re-sparking the brain tools to get it there. And again, tools like micro boosts and micro learnings definitely do help with that.
This some of the things that I came across from his study is that, and this is actually proven also based on a lot of studies that come in later after his initial studies. Working memory capacity, we can remember about 5 to 7 things. That's a max. Anything more than that, that's going to lead to an overload. Our attention span peaks at around 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And I have a feeling this has kind of come down now since then. So,
and if you look at even simple things nowadays, like how people remember, like many years ago, before we had telephones or mobile phones in our pockets, you probably remembered people's telephone numbers. You certainly would remember your parents or your brothers and sisters or the house phone. And nowadays we've got thousands of contacts in our phones. And what you see there is the chunking of information, even in how telephone numbers are displayed in your phone. They might show the first 3 numbers, maybe the next 4 numbers, and then the next 3 numbers. So it tends to break it down in such a way that you can remember. And I'm sure some of the audience might have, they pool it maybe 4 numbers and 4 numbers, like bank accounts might be 8 numbers. They'll have the first 4 they remember, the second 4 they remember. So that is all around, science as to why people remember, and they remember bite-sized pieces. So anyone in Ireland, for example, has like an 08. So anyone who's switched on and is writing down your telephone number immediately puts in 08 into the phone, because they know that the next number is the network number, and the next is a 3 and a 4-digit number, and that's your telephone number. So they break it down like that. And even then the display in iPhones and the display in Samsungs or Galaxies or any of these Androids, they show it broken down as well. So I think even that is lending itself to learning in a bite-sized manner.
Yeah. So it's interesting, these kind of principles of keeping the number of items that we can learn to within that sweet spot of between 5 to 7, making sure the duration of learning is somewhere under 10 minutes. These are some principles that we can kind of keep, right, when we are designing the learning. What is possible now with AI and with a lot of advancements in technology? What are the different things that we can bring in with these principles? These principles are universal. These principles can be applied anywhere. But what are some of the new things that we can do when it comes to microlearning? That's something.
I think, Viṣak, one of the big things now, we're very fortunate that we use Microsoft Copilot within Novartis. And it's a phenomenal tool, and it's come on. But I would say there's a lot of things, like I think you use Claude, I use ChatGPT. There's different tools out there, and AI is evolving big time, especially in the learning space as well. But a lot of it's on the learner as well, because if you think of one of the big reasons why anyone wants to learn, it's that motivation to learn. It could be for a position, it could be for a promotion, it could just be that they're inquisitive. But the great thing is that with tools like AI and things like that, you have it there. The word implementation has been significantly improved. You can base it on the principles you want, within multiple organizations use various different learning theories or design models. And you can apply that model within the organization to the development of your learning, which gets output using these amazing tools. So I definitely think there's a bright future there for it. Obviously, everyone's worried. It's like Terminator 2, the Skynet and all this. But there are many, many good uses for it. And I think anyone who's a learning professional or anyone who's looking at developing microlearning is absolutely do have a look at this conversation, because it's very exciting stuff.
True. Because I've been thinking about it. Microlearning is not a new term. It's been around for quite some time now. The thing is, what we used to do till now was create a whole bunch of learning nuggets and put it out there and hope that people would take it up and kind of track completion rates and make sure that it's all one size fits all. That was what we call as factory mode approach. But now, as you were mentioning, right, with all these agents, AI agents and tools that have come in, tracking mechanisms that can give very seamless analytics data on how learners are consuming the content and such. With all these advancements, I think the next step is for us to kind of create those, what they call personalized experiences within those micro learning pieces itself, see what the learner is exactly looking for, see if we can collect some data around the learner beforehand so that we can, tailor that experience a little bit more. And this is how we kind of make sure that they stay on track and, want to kind of consume that learning, right?
Because we're all very different, Viṣak. If you think about even geographically, we're in a different time zone, different countries, different cultures.
Cheers.
But if you look at the learner as being at the center of this, yes, there's content there. You want them to understand and learn certain things, but the design where they need it. If you talked about this before, was making learning as a series is one thing, but making it an independent, explicit piece, which is a video that can be moved anywhere, in any place, for any time, for any purpose, that has benefits too. One of the things I would call out is obviously then is that the sequencing of the learning, that cognitive load as you progressively build from the foundational through intermediate through into more advanced pieces. You wouldn't give them the advanced stuff ahead of it. In fact, you should train them on the foundational stuff, let them practice it in reality, and then later on come back and you get into more intermediate stuff. You might do things like role plays where you actually have real life scenario stuff. But again, these micro learnings that can be built, even if they're built to be moved around as independent learning blocks, like a YouTube video or a TikTok, is that when you look at them, you could actually say, well, we're introducing this, and this is part of an overall piece, and this is where this sits. You're now in the intermediate stage of manual handling, for example, or we're moving on next. The next one in the series would be manual handling, but you might not be interested in that. You might want to do something on graphical design or something to do with engineering. Could be anything. But the thing is that well-designed content can and is movable, and it can actually be brought into many LXPs and put in as a playlist. It could be put into your favorite list, and you can play it then in a sequence. And again, you're meeting the learner where they want to be met. So exactly. I think that's a big one to take away.
That's a huge one. That's a huge one, because it's possible now. I mean, probably a few years back, we were dreaming about it. We were seeing like, is it possible to make the learning really personalized for the learner so that it makes an impact? And now we are there. I think we have the technology and the means to kind of do it. So it's important that we think about it, right? When we create those strategies, especially when you're thinking about microlearning.
Absolutely. And they're very exciting times. And the fact that these tools are becoming, available to us, it's a very exciting time.
It is. So yes, that's some of the, things that I wanted to talk about regarding microlearning, the principles behind it. If we have to actually look at the implementation bit, what are we looking at in terms of next generation? We were saying that we can use AI, but how do we go about it? I think for me, in my head, these are the three main areas where, we kind of need to pay attention. One is definitely adaptive learning paths. We don't want to kind of put everybody into the same learning journey. We want to kind of make sure that the journey is different for each person based on their styles, based on their various environmental factors and such, right? I mean, different people would have different ways in which they would be going through their lives, going through work. And so we need to kind of respect that and see if we can slip.
I'm just thinking on that, Viṣak, as well as for our attendees who were on the call and anyone who watches the recording later, is don't let that be an alarm bell that you're talking about personalized journeys here, because the beauty of the tech that's coming now and that we have now is that it's a build. It's been well-designed learning, but myself, Viṣak, Sid, any of us can go in and start that on the platform because it's been designed to cater for our individual needs. So we're not having to build it for Will and then build a different one for Viṣak. No, the platform does all of that. And the great thing is that when you have a well-designed platform with well-designed learning journeys and paths, is that the system takes care of it. And it works with the learner and moves with their preferences and provides them, and think of a role. So you might define a role and say that the learning will follow this particular pathway. So the great thing is that when it's been designed well within the platform, is that it is almost learner agnostic. It will take whatever you need as a learner and provide you your pathway through. For example, we see sometimes that you know the answer to the first part of it. Well done, you're going to skip to section 2 because you've actually validated that you know section 1. And that's a great adaptive piece, because that rewards you as having remembered section 1 and having been able to recall what was the actual correct answer. So the reward is that you get to move forward in the learning and then to move on to the next section. So the great thing about that adaptive learning path is that that will cater for it. And suddenly then the learner has a much more seamless, personalized experience.
And in many cases, I've seen them that they want to stay on the platform. They want to continue the journey just because it's kind of meeting their needs and, basically adapting to them, who the learner is. So I think, yeah, that's very important. Context-aware content. This is more in terms of, your health and safety, your compliance trainings, especially in mission critical areas and such, where it would be nice. We have the technology today to make sure that, we have the sensors to see that we are in this particular geo-tagged area, or we are in this particular area with, there's a high temperature, or there would be environmental conditions. If we can track this real time and make sure that, we are giving them the content for that particular environmental situation. Say they are looking at a particular tool and they don't know exactly what they need to do. If the technology is able to identify that they are in front of this tool and give the required information then and there, I think that's like a really good win for us. And that is possible today. This is something that I was like, that we should probably look at. And
I think one of the things you mentioned there, Viṣak, was around the insights, and notwithstanding everything that we see on screen here, is designing learning from the beginning to be able to look at the impact at the end of it. So if you think about something that you're building and it's a path or it's context aware, whatever it might be, is that you can look at it after and say, how did it go? And how has it changed, not just the learner, but how has it impacted the business as well? Is the business in a better position now? Can we state categorically that, listen, we've had significant increases in performance in this area because we launched a particular adaptive learning campaign over a number of weeks with these nudges that we talked about, having those little gentle learning nudges to keep people engaged with the learning. So absolutely, I think, and again, that goes right back, Viṣak, to designing learning well, which is really, I know Apposite do a lot of that as well. So we've obviously worked together on this, but I think definitely with well-designed learning, you're well on a winning way then.
Absolutely. I think this is something that every instructional designer needs to kind of keep in mind, right? Going forward, it's not enough that we developed the conventional way of learning, but now we need to kind of keep in mind these things. And I just wanted to kind of touch on that also. It's not that these are all strategies, right? For why we are using microlearning and how we can implement it. But it's not that difficult. And I appreciate the fact that, Will, you said to our listeners over here that don't get scared. I mean, it's not such a big thing that, it's easy to kind of create these adaptive learning paths. So I was thinking, like, you can see my screen over here. I was just kind of getting into another thought experiment where, say there is, for example, an OSHA new policy document that has come in for a particular standard operating procedure that, let's say, it's just come in, and if an organization wanted to kind of roll this out into a training, and initially as an instructional designer, I would probably want to kind of just get in, see if I can create a 6-hour or an 8-hour content, whatever it would come up with within this. But if I wanted to get into microlearning, a strategy where I do employ microlearning and various other, strategies, how would that go about? So I used Claude over here, and it came up with a very interesting strategy. But before the strategy, what we need to remember is we need to check with the client first, right, on what are the factors in that organization, what are the various constraints and criteria that can lead to the success of this program. So then that got me thinking into what would be the questions that we can ask the client. And that's what I did with Claude. I'm using Claude as the tool over here. And I asked it to give me a set of questions that I can ask the client. And it gave me some fantastic questions that I can just, check with the client. This would kind of help me understand how to deal with that personalization, with how to make that system adaptive. These are some questions that can help me think in that region. So I'm using AI over here. I wanted to let our listeners know that we can use AI to think about what is it that we need to think about to create the strategy. Like how should
I
we?
think one of the things I was delighted when one of my colleagues from my master's, which we just finished, was saying about AI. And the thing was, it gets you off a blank page. And a lot of organizations are starting their journey with AI. And to be honest, some are terrified. And I understand that. But if you have an awareness about what the capabilities are, particularly around learning, and learning is one of the huge focus areas for agentic AI, for generative AI, and all of these tools coming out. And if you're in a position to speak to organizations who can help you to understand it as part of your digital transformation, you will be surprised about how well it works. And again, with trained models, you can have it trained on your particular organization's way of doing things, so that it's not giving you hallucinations of something or telling you lies about something that's not relevant to your organization. So whether it be in engineering, sports, medicine, whatever it might be, the great thing is these tools are becoming much, much better.
Yes.
And again, I do think that with the community that are out there, they are looking at the value and the ability to trust these tools. Now, not forgetting, if I was to be asked a question and I give an answer, and then you ask me 10 minutes later the same question, am I going to give you the same verbatim answer? And the answer I give you is, of course not. I'm a human being. So what you'll often see sometimes is that you'll ask AI a question and you get an answer, and then you might go back and get a different answer. But it's just like talking to a human. Now, again, as they improve and as the tools are given strict rules and prompts, you will get very detailed and very comprehensive outputs that can help the organization to develop really strong learning content. And I think that goes right to your point there, Viṣak, about working with organizations or getting involved and experiment yourselves, is you will find before you know it that you're actually becoming quite well used to actually using these platforms and tools.
Yeah. It's going back to that learning thing, right? If you're constantly using a tool, then you're gonna get better at it, and it's gonna. Human beings have a really funny way of using tools repeatedly and probably getting completely different specialized outputs from it. I mean, I don't know how they do it, but it's crazy.
It is, and like one thing that we speak very much so in Novartis is that you are the pilot in Copilot. So while this amazing tool is giving you insights and information, do not delegate your knowledge to the tool, because you ultimately are the person or people making the executive decision. One of the fears you see now in society and in learning is that folks are delegating their knowledge to the tool, and they're taking that, yes, it's verbatim, Copilot notes, as I mentioned, we use Copilot for meeting notes. They will provide you with very comprehensive and often very accurate notes, but you as the human being has to go in and validate that is actually correct. There's a very interesting book called Agentic AI right now I'm reading, and it talks about the very beginning where it said, give me a review or how to plan for this trip to this hotel in Antarctica. And it gave an amazing output. Fantastic, brilliant. Couldn't have done better myself. The only problem is the hotel doesn't exist. So it's the thing is that it will try to please you in a lot of senses. But I think the big thing is as people upskill and use these tools more and more and become familiar with the capabilities, is that they will create great things. And again, partnering with organizations who are experts in this field is always going to help.
True. I guess ultimately it depends on the human counterpart, right? To kind of validate and make sure that what the AI is producing is in line with those expectations. That
very much so. I think the fear would be, Viṣak, is that people would delegate or basically hand over their subject matter expertise. And if you look at your people, you know, folks who are on this webinar right now, a lot of them are SMEs in their particular field. And yes, the tool is very clever, but you bring the human aspect to it. You've lived and you've walked those footsteps. So you're going to apply a lifetime of experience to it as well, where in a lot of cases, you don't get that context as you have there in the actual outputs. So I think definitely you look at using the tech and using the new generation tools that we have. You know, don't forget that you're the pilot in this environment here, okay?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I also wanted to let the listeners know that, you know, I'm not sharing any of the specific tools like Articulate Rise, or, you know, there are a lot of others out there that we are using, EC Generator and such, that we can quickly create microlearning nuggets. That's not the problem here. We can do it. But how well do we create it? And, you know, how smartly can we create it so that at the end, the learner needs to get that experience, right? I mean, so how do we develop that? So that's why I'm not getting into those tools, but I know that if we use AI in the right way, we can speed some things up. And obviously, as Will mentioned, we need to use that human element, our own intelligence, to kind of make sure that what we get is in line. For example, over here, right after that OSHA document and all had come in, I was checking out to see if I can create a sample within Claude itself. Pretty interesting. Let me show you. So this is a microlearning nugget that is based on that new OSHA document, Will. It's pretty nice. I mean, based on whatever information I know about the document, I think the way the questions are mapped out, how the responses are given, there's an immediate explanation over here. What is a safety tip? This came out quite fast. Obviously, I'll have to take this to a subject matter expert to really vet it out. But this is, I save so much of time in creating a short POC, right? I can present this to my client and see if this is the way we need to go. So I just wanted to emphasize on how we can use these tools if we think smartly and use the principles rightly. It's very easy to kind of create some of these learning experiences fast.
Super, super.
Getting back to our presentation, I just wanted to say we were talking about this earlier, right, Will? Microlearning. Motivation is very important over here. Whatever experience we create, how do we motivate the learner to take that experience, give that time to, you know, kind of get into that routine, habit formation over here. So I had some points. Obviously, there are a lot more when we think of motivation, but beyond simple, unnecessary gamification, what if we create some sort of, you know, story-based approaches, scenario-based approaches? We were also talking about this, Will, right? It does not have to be a digital solution. It can be a simple role-playing scenario where, or a meeting, maybe a water cooler meeting that's scheduled where, you know, a bunch of us can get together and discuss a particular new compliance that has come in or a new process that has come in. We talk about it. So those kind of little moments, how do we kind of make them more meaningful for the learner?
And we've done some scenarios as well, Viṣak, where we built, like, in cases where we couldn't actually have those face-to-face, particularly when we look back to the last few years. But we built some learning solutions that were in a position that you could actually replicate a conversation. And that really resonates with people. I know some of the tools out there are becoming so realistic that it's very lifelike. And that's certainly no Apposite are heavily involved in that space.
Yeah.
But certainly what I felt as a learner undertaking that was that I can understand what this is. I can resonate with this conversation that this, in our case, for example, maybe a salesperson, one of the field force, and a HCP is having about a particular brand of our product. And you could see the conversation develop, and what it does is then it helps you to understand, okay, now I get it. Now I can work with that. So I definitely think those type of things would absolutely motivate the learner. I think when you look at it here, you know, designing really effective stuff as you have here, you know, the engine of effective microlearning, very much so. And I think this is where it's a blend. There is no one size fits all, especially within very, 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 you know, varied organizations. But that's why taking your time, doing the initial work, and then building strong and well-designed learning will have multiples of impact.
Yeah. It's very important as an instructional designer for us to really know the pulse of the learner, right? As the more information we get about how they work, how they live, how they think, that's all the more information for us to develop those personalized learning experiences. So I think it's important as we take up new projects and all that to keep this in mind on, who exactly our learner is, what ticks them, what kind of, gets them to form those habits of learning, because that's what we are trying to do here with those micro learning modules that we can create. How do we arrange them in a particular way so that the learner gets it, like particular frequency, maybe a few days or a week later, a month later, do they get that? That's something that we need to design here.
Excellent.
And obviously that visible progress, a lot of times we learn things and we are given information around, okay, you have completed this module or you have scored this particular percentage of, this thing in the quiz. But beyond that, how does my learning journey relate to the overall organizational development? Or, how do I get to see whether I've learned this much? How much does this translate to in terms of, maybe company revenue or maybe development of the team? These kind of insights would really help motivate the learner to kind of keep at it, right? So
yeah.
I'm trying to say is if we can move away from those traditional, just completion scores or quiz scores, that would be really great.
Yeah, like if you look at, we have plenty of happy sheets in this world, and yes, environment and was the instructor good are very important metrics. But when you get into the business side of things and data analysts world, you look at things like what you have on screen, like whether it be a dashboard where you can see the impact it's had and where it's actually landed with business impact. That is the real value. And in fact, as a learning development professional, and I know some of my colleagues are online as well, that is where you really can bring the business impact and show the value of the learning that you've developed and that the organization has been able to benefit from. And tools like these dashboards you see with the visual or, a visible progress or even the habits being formed.
Yeah.
If you can demonstrate this and then the executive leadership team can be shown this as part of the outputs of what you've developed and spent some money on, that benefits the organization. There's a whole cost benefit there.
Yeah. Great. I think covered most of it in what we can do with microlearning, how we can design it. Looking at some of the new ways in which, we can design, we have been doing digital learning, we've been doing classroom-based trainings, but is there something that we can do new now? And I was thinking that everybody's on a mobile now. Everybody has, the apps that is needed to kind of make sure that, they are connected to the net and they're getting the learning content right on time. All those micro nudges and all that we see on our favorite apps, right? I mean, we can employ the same one. So mobile first design, I think that's it's still we are the reason why I'm bringing this up is I see that a lot of our projects are still going on to the old way of, we need to sit in front of a laptop or desktop and you need to kind of take this up. Is there a way we can bring in the mobile first approach into our learning experience? I think that's something that
we certainly do. We are in, like, I work within the US skills and capabilities team, and there is a mobile approach there. A lot of our sales teams are in the field and they do tablets and they mobiles. I think what we do need to get away from is the fact that if a learner is looking, or a person in our organization is looking at a mobile phone, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're on YouTube or TikTok or Facebook or X. They could very well be doing, as you see in the picture below you, is a guy or a girl or a person who's learning. And this may very well be the mode that you want to present the learning to them. And if you happen to see somebody with their head on the phone, don't be making assumptions. The world has radically changed in the last number of years, and the innovations since the smartphone came out. And again, we are trying to meet learners where they are. A lot of learners are on mobile devices.
Yeah. Even the apps also, right? Well, I was thinking, most of the time we are trying to pull learners away from where they currently are. Most of them, they would be on Facebook or Instagram or various other apps that we kind of feel ourselves being drawn to, right? Instead, we are trying to get them onto those learning management systems or SharePoint sites or whatever, what have you. And
yes, yeah, I think the beauty of some of the mobile designs that are being done is that they talk to the LMS, they talk to the LXP, they talk to the analytics dashboards. So it doesn't matter if they do it on laptop, PC, tablet or phone. It's going to pick it up on the dashboard that Will or Viṣak has undertaken that learning.
yeah,
So you're meeting them in the medium that they want to have it.
exactly.
And it's a bit like stopping watching a movie on Netflix and then going to the other room and picking it up because your daughter's just kicked you out of the room. You can pick up where you left off and it remembers where you were and the system will track that back. So from a business perspective, the learner is going to have a seamless learning experience. They can bookmark it, come back an hour later. They might want to pick up the kids. Could be anything. But the great thing is that when you design it well and you have the devices talking in the background to that dashboard you showed, for example, on the previous slide, well, then suddenly now you're meeting the people and you're being very clever about how you deliver learning. And I think that's one of the big things. And mobile first certainly is a big focus within my team and within Novartis, and also particularly when we have the field reps out doing great work on the ground.
Well, that's great to know. I'm sure there are a lot of companies currently looking into this because it's probably the future as we go ahead. Besides this, I think I've been noticing a huge increase in podcast-based, materials coming out over there. A lot of people are actively engaged onto either video podcasts or your audio podcasts, and they're either during the commute or when they're doing something, they're listening to it. And I know for a fact that there is some sort of a tacit knowledge transfer that's happening even subconsciously, maybe when they are on these devices.
Yeah.
And
I remember it's, I think when we spoke last, I mentioned one of the things that I often hear is that, yeah, the stuff that you can do in your own time, and the conversation needs to be had around, well, what is your own time? If you're telling me that I'm going to learn Novartis material or whomever, Apposite's material or whomever's material in my own time, well, it's not my own time then. Anymore. So I think we got to look at the learners as important people in our organization. Everyone from the CEO down to the most junior person at the coalface is a person, and the expectation that you'll do it in your own time using your mobile device by looking at, on the train, on the bus, or you won't be doing it in the car because that's illegal.
Yeah.
If you went driving. But even things that, say you want to prep for a meeting, fantastic tool. Heading in on the bus, fantastic tool. But I think the change of attitude around the assumption that you will do this in your own time is a conversation to be had. But definitely, I think what we are seeing is a much more available space or available ecosystem for learning to take place. And that could be something that takes as simple as 10 seconds to answer a quick SMS that come in. It can be something that's literally pushed out through an app on a certain cadence to nudge you to learn a bit more. We are seeing that where it's become immersive now. And I think it is absolutely the place to meet the learner at, because everybody has one, if not two, or maybe even three of these devices close to hand. True. I think everyone who's on this call, their mobile phone is probably within arm's reach of them. So yeah. It's a very close to you device at all times.
At all times. And I think, that's one conversation, Will, I totally agree regarding the time that you're spending for certain types of learning experiences, whether they are official or personal. I guess that space needs to be given. But besides that, the diverse types of, solutions and experience that we are having right now, that is something that we can take advantage of. And I think lastly, in terms of workflow integration, instead of getting them away from their work and spending some time on those learning experiences, which is crucial in certain cases, I do understand. But in various other areas, I think just in time when they're doing the work, if they can get those, very specific, relevant nudges and informational, pieces that can help them move forward in their work, I think that's the best thing that we can get them, right. while maintaining.
Definitely, Viṣak, definitely. If you look at that and those nudges that you do, there's a tactic to them. So you're not just doing it on a particular, I would send it every week. Space them and be intentional about when you actually send them, because you want people to have a spaced learning. Like I remember something a week ago, great. The curve tells us we figure out things quickly, but it might be that you want to re-energize people, particularly around a particular initiative or something. But I think definitely be intentional, not just about your learning design, but also about how you nudge people in the future where you're actually doing more things as well.
I realize that we are, I think, over time in terms of the session.
We are, but I noticed that most people have stayed on and they're fantastic attendees. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, we have just a couple more slides, I think, almost done over here. I think besides we were talking about this, Will, there is one way in which we can give them those digital solutions and make sure that they stay in silos and they learn. But the social aspect of learning cannot be ignored. So while we are looking at micro-learning, maybe we need to think of these experiences where we bring people together and bring in the collaborative experiences, because I think that's very important for
absolutely, yep.
So I think that's about it. We kind of covered most of what microlearning is, what is the science behind microlearning, why do we need those, to remember those principles in terms of, how much information a learner can remember, what are the kind of motivational strategies we need. So these kind of things are important. We also looked at, how to use AI as much as possible to kind of brainstorm, come up with, insights and analysis on data, build up quick prototypes and experiences. Always make sure that, we have that human element that makes, guides the AI output. And we also kind of looked at new ways in which we can bring in microlearning, into our learning and development environments and such. Immediate actions, I guess we can, send you off with is that try and look at your existing learning, programs. Try and see if you can identify one of them that maybe we can convert into a microlearning strategy, and try that out. See if, that would yield some results. The best way to, see if something is working is to actually try it out and get the data from it. So yeah, also see if you can get in a peer teaching program where, you bring in people together and create those micro moments where there is a sharing of knowledge. That's something that you can look at. Always see if you can, build something that you can get your executive to sponsor for. Bring in ideas to, people and see if they can, be part of it. And I guess at the end of it, it's always important that we try new things. So we want to be part of this journey. In case if you want to discuss some ideas with us, want to try out something new, we are here. We would love to kind of give you a hand, try and discuss strategies, help you out with the solution if possible. And yeah, it starts with us. So we hear a lot about the microlearning strategy, the transformations that are there. It starts with us. Let's see if we can, do something substantial over here.
Super.
Right. All right. So thank you so much, Will. I think this was an amazing journey. We covered a lot of points over here. I'll be sharing the link for this recording also after this. And we would be having a lot of further sessions also. So really looking forward to those.
Excellent. Thanks, Viṣak. Great to see you. And thank you, everyone, for attending and staying with us. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.